complex and profound problem like poverty, especially in racialized communities, is not going to be solved by a community garden, but that community garden will be a space where you can start having a conversation around some of the issues, and where you can start developing skills and changing the perspectives.
When you look at an urban or a core urban community like Toronto, where you have this downtown society and then the peripheral suburbia, you have communities of seniors, you have predominant social housing, most of the social housing existing in these suburban communities that have limited or restricted access to even to produce or to fresh, healthy food. And you have this growing cluster of, restaurants and unhealthy choices of where food, fast food restaurants and so on and so forth, that kind of build into the closer peripheral area of these communities. And then the grocery store is maybe a half hour, 45-minute walk. So when you have to spend your dollar, when we look at convenience and economics and just the overall psychology that goes into picking our food, we start to see, an ebb and flow where the choices are made of where you're going to spend your dollar, the choices that are made of what you're going to eat.
We know we have shaky food systems, not only in this community, but all over the country, in our major cities, in our rural communities, and villages, and around the world. And we really have to go back to the days of a local food system, a food system that really made sense. We've got away from that. And look where we are. We're the most unhealthy nation, the most unhealthy world than at any other time in history. We really don't have another choice, because our food system is in very bad condition, and the only way to change that, and the only way to survive, all we have to do is look at Japan. If we have a natural disaster, most people only have a day and a half of food in their refrigerators. We're not prepared. If there was a national disaster in California, we'd be hurting. If we have a problem in Florida, we'd be hurting. So we take all of this for granted, that food's just going to always be there. And we know. All we have to do, again, is look at Japan, look at Haiti. What happened? Haiti had no food system at all. And a lot of people die. 5 million people die each year around the world for lack of food or water. Tonight, 1 out of 3 of our young people will go to bed without a meal. Hunger is never, in a country that has so much wealth, why is that? You have to ask yourself. I always ask myself that.
I think there's a lot of room for things to change, and they will change. Right? I think it's just a matter of time, right? And so I'm confident that there will be changes. But I don't think those changes will happen until people really en masse start understanding that we need food. We need more secure food. So there's still, despite all the talk of food security and a little bit of reality that's scary that has gotten out, I think in general people believe that everything's going to be okay, right? We got lots of food, right? And the reality is we don't really have a secure food system here. We're really dependent on imports, right, for the food, and we really have a couple days stock in grocery stores, and then people are going to be on the phone. Right?
One of the main things that Food Share and the work that community food animation is really focusing on is around food justice and equity. And that is related directly to the fact that, yeah, you will see different health outcomes in different parts of the city, and those are related to income, access to food, which happen to be connected to racialized communities.
Food insecurity stems from so many different layers of marginalization, historically going back to this being a colonial, country. And all of these institutionalized approaches to community development trickle down into the food system. So we look at a me first system, and me is those who are privileged, be it through economic privilege or be it through or race privilege. And we develop institutions and government and community framework based on the me first.
Let me tell you firsthand what our view is. First of all, we understand that we live in a global system of white supremacy. And I would be negligent if I didn't put this term out there. There's a global system of white supremacy that really grows out of, in many ways, the imperialism that came out of Europe, out of England, France, Spain, Portugal, Belgium, and conquered peoples around the world, took control of their land. And of course, that's what happened in the Western Hemisphere, which is why we have Canada, and why we have what we call the United States, that this land was taken from peoples who inhabited the land for centuries. The same thing happened in Africa, the same thing happened in the Caribbean. And so food insecurity is really an outgrowth of this global system of white supremacy and this global system of imperialism, which has dispossessed people of their land and concentrated the ownership of land in the hands of a few, usually white males, and in the hands of those who are capitalists, so that the majority of people don't derive benefit from the land that they traditionally had access to. And if we're really serious about food justice and food equity, we have to deal with the question of land.
This little plant of mine, I'm gonna let it shine, let it shine, let it shine, and let it grow. This garden of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This garden of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This garden of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine.
With the People's Peas Garden, I guess it's there's several kind of interconnected reasons for that particular project, like for planting a free food garden in Queen's Park. One of them is like specific to the location, right? That it's Queen's Park, and it's a statement on like the government. That's a representative of the provincial government, obviously, but it's a statement that at all levels of government have failed to, in any significant way, to address poverty and food insecurity. Never mind food sovereignty, that's not even on the agenda. The free food garden for all is kind of a statement on not as opposed to community gardens, but a lot of community gardens are like exclusive in some way, right? It's only for certain participants at certain times, and this garden specifically was to have none of that, right? Just for anybody at any time to contribute in any way they can and to take anything they need or want. Another piece is the like reclamation of public space, right? The fact that it's public land that's could be used to help people in some way. And not that we would, the idea wasn't to take over the entire Queen's Park, because it's used for all kinds of other activities that people use it for and that have other benefits.
So the strategy was either depending on the mood of the day and the police presence and on who was all there. We were thinking about planting a garden on the south lawn, digging in the soil, and then going for the imagery of people getting arrested for planting a garden. Plan B, which was something I was more leaning towards, was to have the picnic as a ruse or a clever distraction so that a lot of cops and media would show up thinking that we're going to be doing something very dangerous and controversial and getting arrested. So we laid out all of our signs and we were singing songs of peace and lovage. And we had these like a beautiful potluck and picnic, and we gave all of our media interviews. And the cops were like getting all nervous, like when are they going to make their move and plant the garden? Meanwhile, we had a special teams moving soil and compost and plants and water from behind Hart House over here to this location that we picked out, which was a giant tree that they just cut down and uprooted. So the soil was still loose and filled with wood chips, and it was getting full sun and near a water outlet right across the street. And so after the picnic, we packed up our stuff and walked north, and the birds and the bees provided aerial support while Lieutenant Earthworm readied the ground troops. And we moved in and we formed a big circle, and we said a few words, and then we sang, "All we are saying
is give peace a chance. Give peace a chance. Excusez.
And these are coming around.
Excusez.
Yeah, sure. I'll hand them out too.
Yeah, perfect. I was just handing out a bunch.
Anyone want to plant something? Okay, I'll just grab a bunch.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
I'm a farmer, so it seems kind of mysterious to be a farmer these days, but it's really quite simple. So that's the foundation of everything I do is based around food and growing food. After coming up to Canada a couple of years ago, it was difficult to get into farming. It's not so accessible a field. So the only way in as a farmer, even though I was living in the suburbs in the country, was actually to investigate urban farming.
I think we're just starting to tap into that kind of potential. I think that's one of the challenges the City of Toronto has in the coming years is building and scaling up the potential of urban agriculture. We're still not there yet, but there is definitely a lot of potential in it becoming a source of income for communities.
Here in Toronto, we have a lot of amazing people doing amazing work and amazing organizing, but I think our production of food is not representative of the amount of energy that's been put into the movement. Right? So I think it's very important that people like Will Allen that produce huge amounts, huge quantity, hundreds of thousands of pounds of food, right, on hundreds of acres in urban settings, come and testify and make the people that are better funded than the organizations in Milwaukee are, right? Realize that we have a lot to live up to.
How do you respond to the naysayers who say that locals and urban agriculture cannot compete with the industrial agricultural?
Go out and prove it to them. That's what we do. We gotta develop the infrastructure and prove it to them because I don't listen to that garbage. So I just go out and do our work. But what we're doing now we reached a point where we have 23 farms, and we're building infrastructure that will change the dynamics of Milwaukee. From less than 1%, right now we're less than 1% of locally grown food. We believe in the next 2 years we can change that to 10%. And the implications around that are staggering when you think about it. 10% less trucks coming in from Texas and Florida and California and other major ag states. 10%, more than 10% more jobs in the food system, and 100 different categories of jobs, more than 100 different categories of jobs, not just people putting food in the ground, but we need folks that are doing renewable energy. We need engineers, we need plumbers, electricians, we need finance people, we need educators, we need everybody from every profession you can think of to be a part. 10%, more than 10% improvement in health.
One of the things that makes it difficult for people to move forward with their food idea or with their food innovation is that a lot of the laws and regulations aren't keeping time with the innovation in the food sector. So the ideas that people want to put forward are not contemplated by the legislation. Like, I've worked with people where they have this new concept, and you could talk to 15 people at different levels of the city or the province, and they're like, I don't know, I don't think that's gonna work, because it doesn't fall into, class A, B, C, or D. And you're like, yeah, but I mean, why would we want to dissuade somebody from starting this really amazing community building, food security increasing, food awareness increasing project? And they don't really have an answer. It's just that they don't have a category for something like that yet.
Limitations are just how strict it is to start a garden. In Toronto, there's a process. It's not a bad process necessarily, because you have to kind of consult neighbors, and they want to see that you're building enough support and resources to have that garden exist if it's in a public park, public space. But it can be difficult. The city doesn't have enough staff or enough management to run this program that they have. So I think there were about 50 applications for community gardens and parks this year, and there's only one staff person that's supposed to approve and resource and help these projects get started.
Like, the municipal process for creating like a sanctioned community garden is like extremely arduous. That's pretty much prohibitive for the people that like actually need free food the most, in terms of being able to deal with bureaucracy, like having the time and the energy and the skills necessary to plan out all of these steps.
I think one of the things that needs to be addressed, or one of the things that needs to be recognized, is that we have no leadership in government on food. Food is not seen as a real priority. Food is seen as like a given, even though for so many people it's not.
When we work with a community that wants to start a food garden, community garden, not only is it providing some direct access to food, to healthy, fresh food, which might not be otherwise available, but it's a way for people to come together to talk about other things that are happening that are connected to their health, to their lives, really. I mean, it's a way for people to also discover and build on strengths that they have, whether it's holding a meeting, facilitation, things that normally, again, we wouldn't associate with urban agriculture or gardening, but are really essential.
The core of my work is, providing tools for the people that I work with to become self-determined. Like, they determine where they're going to go, how they're going to, do it, how they're going to spend their dollar. And you can't do that if you're not accurately informed. Sometimes people don't even know their situation because you're just so used to running the mill and being in that situation. They don't even identify that, we're food insecure.
So a lot of people who coordinate a good food market or a community garden can use that on their resume, and it makes a big difference in accessing employment. And it's also a big difference in building on your own self-confidence when you're out of work, you're living in a stigmatized community that's always seen a certain way, but you're able to create a beautiful space where people are coming together and speaking with each other in a way that they wouldn't have really had the chance to do before. It's an amazing kind of empowerment, because we want to go beyond. Food security is important, but I think as Malik said once, that really kind of blew my mind, is you can have food security, and you do have food security in prisons. You have your 3 square meals, but you have no sovereignty, you have no decision making. And I think a really important piece of the kinds of programs that we support is the sense of decision making and power, taking power over something in your community. So for a lot of groups that we're working with, community garden might be one of the very few places where they have the decision-making power over how it works.
I'm very pleased to be a part of the Black Creek Community Farm project that is up and coming and looking to be online early next spring, producing food. And this is a project where Fresh City Farms, for-profit enterprise, Everdale, which is an environmental learning institute, nonprofit, Food Share, which is a United Way organization that is the most significant distributor of food, good food in Toronto through their Good Food Basket, and African Food Basket, which is one of the longest standing organizations in Toronto around food and food justice. They began in the 90s and really were one of the catalyzing organizations around community gardening especially. So because we're including, or there is included several organizations that have already been doing work in the community, and plus this project has not been designed in a boardroom somewhere and then brought to the community. So the project is being very respectful and cognizant of the fact that the project needs to be designed with the community. Right? So over the last month, we've been having a series of community engagement meetings where the community and grassroots organizations were invited out to all-day visioning session right at the farm site. We had a turnout of over 35 representatives from various grassroots organizations, and we had intense visioning and idea sessions. Some of the ideas were uncomfortable. Some of them were very critical of what we were doing, right? But we took it all in and we've documented it, and it's going to be part of our process. I'm not sure if it has never been done, right? But I would guess that it's likely one of the first times that so much public engagement has happened before a project has actually been designed, right? So I think that is an important model, right? That the community needs to be informed of the process and not have a process imposed on them.
In a lot of cases, I think it's kind of an NGO or a nonprofit or some type of external group kind of going into the community. And, I'll talk about a specific experience. There's one in St. Catharines that I did a case study on a community garden. And basically what I found after doing all these interviews and going to observe was that, this organization that was basically made up of, relatively well-off white people who don't live in the neighborhood where the garden is, going in and, building the garden and building a shed and donating tools and coordinating the entire thing, right? So the only way that the community is involved is physically doing the gardening. So in that sense, when it's those type of projects, no. I don't. All it's doing, I think, is help maybe improving food skills and improving nutrition, improving, that type of, like, those things directly. But where it's done when it comes from the community, like looking at examples from Detroit, right, where what I just described didn't happen. It was just people who were like, look at all this space, we're going to grow food. And it kind of from there turned into community gardens and education and all of that. And in that case, like, the fact that it came from them is what's transformative, right? And food is kind of the venue, and it has immediate, like, it has effect in their immediate reality of what there is to eat.
We're at D-Town Farm, and D-Town Farm is an urban agricultural project of the Detroit Black Community Food Security Network. We currently have 7 acres inside of Rouge Park, which is the city of Detroit's largest park. We grow more than 30 different crops in traditional row cropping, using traditional row cropping, in hoop houses like we're standing in now to extend the growing season. Really what we're doing is we're modeling techniques here. We don't think that one 7-acre farm will significantly reduce the problem of lack of access to food in the city of Detroit. But really what we're trying to do is plant seeds in people's consciousness and try to encourage people to engage in urban farming either on a very small scale or on larger scales as a way of becoming more self-sufficient. Even if we grow 5% of our food, that would be a great leap from where we are now. We're only about 1% of the food, of the produce consumed in Detroit is grown locally. So we're trying to plant the seeds of urban agriculture, but we're also using this project to build a model of community self-determination. We also are very involved in the discussion about the impact of race on the food system. And so we participated for the last 2.5 years in an initiative called Undoing Racism in the Detroit Food System, where we engage in a dialogue, a critical dialogue about how race impacts food and how it's one of the factors that determines who has access to good food and who doesn't. And even within the good food movement, racism is a reality. So we've tried to raise the level of that discussion in the local community who's growing food.
I think so sometimes we lose sight of the fact that, even very thoughtful projects like Community Food Centers, like Community Food Centers Canada, which I believe to be sort of one of the most forward-thinking food organizations, and it is having a real impact, even with things like that, it doesn't change the sort of, the underlying inequalities that make it so that people have, less access to healthy food and culturally relevant food and all of that stuff.
See this in Chicago, New York, wherever you have low-income peoples in high-density populations, you're the perfect guinea pig, right? You're the perfect, perfect scenario for my research. You're the perfect, this is exactly what I need to get my master's or my PhD. And the reality is that you have just this, this turnover of researchers and programs and funding that never, or rarely I should say, impact the local community. I would say 80% of the time the people conducting the research or facilitating the program have never or lived in or do not live in that community.
The term food desert, while there's a reason why it exists, and there is some benefit to it in acknowledging that there is a problem in food access. There is a lack of grocery stores. But the problem of just using that one label is that you forget about, and you stigmatize, and you forget about what the strengths that are in a community. Jane Finch community here is often, when you just say the 2 words Jane Finch, people think immediately of crime and violence and scarcity. When you work in the community, and I used to work at the Jane Finch Community Family Center, the amount of activity and talent and skills is it's incredible.
It just seems that we tend to, especially academically, build up these negative these negative outlooks or these negative titles and pegs and names and just labels for challenged, marginalized. Like, these are the words we need to look at. Oppressed, communities. That's really what's happening there, right? To justify our work, not looking at the effect and the emotional, the physical, the mental effect on the people who are being, who are living there, and this is their home.
So I think it's a kind of challenge, I think, of food activists or people who are interested in food access to find the terminology, to talk about the problems without actually stigmatizing a whole community or area.
There's really a lot of land in the city. Like, we're right in the middle of downtown here, basically, and there's lots of space to be growing food. And in inner suburbs of Toronto, there's even more, especially around high apartment buildings. There's a lot of land around those, and so there's the space, there's interest, for sure. I see a lot of growth happening.
Food revolution is really a revolution of many things. It's about changing the relationship that people have with each other, with food. It's a huge kind of project if it's going to be done right, if it's going to be done with principles of equity.